Okay, so this video is about creating patterns, okay? Quite often in 2D design, you'll want to create some patterns. So I'm going to start with a drawing that we've produced in a previous video. Okay, this little fish design. I'm going to create a range of different patterns or using different techniques such as moving, copying, mirroring, rotating, changing the size or the scale of the object, and using rectangular and circular arrays. So the first thing I'm going to do, because obviously this fish is made up of different parts, is I'm just going to group it together so that the parts don't get lost. So I'm going to draw a box around the outside using the left mouse, and I'm going to go to edit and group. I could also press Control and G like that. So that's given me the actual shape. Okay, now I'm obviously going to start by making this a little bit smaller so it fits on the screen a bit better. So I'm actually going to use the change size scale tool. Now you can obviously, as I've shown you previously, we can click the edge like this and hold the shift key and we can scale the product down like this on the screen. But what we're going to do this time is we're going to use the transform menu, which is over here, and this is what we're focusing on in the video today. So we're going to use this one here that says alter the size of the selected objects. Now what it asks us for here is a scale factor. Now we've got an X factor which is on the horizontal and a Y factor which is obviously on the vertical. Now I'm going to make it half size, so my scale factor is going to be 0.5 on the X and 0.5 on the Y. Now if I use two different factors, obviously it's going to do the same as what would happen if we didn't hold the shift key, and it will sort of squash or change the proportions of the shape. So I want it to stay the same, so I'm putting the same measurement in both and clicking OK and clicking the screen once, and as you can see it's now half the size that it actually was. Okay, so I'm going to start my first pattern. And my first pattern is going to be to create a simple copied line of these little fishes going in the same direction. Okay, so I choose my fish like this. I'm going to choose the move copy tool here, so I'm holding down the button and choosing move or copy, and I'm going to create a series of repeats of this. Now we always have to remember that the first shape counts as one. Okay, so any repeats are going to be additional shapes, and I want to have 4 in a line, so I'm going to create 3 repeats of the fish shape there and click OK. Now what it gives you then is a cursor appears. Okay, now what this cursor is basically saying is where do you want to copy from and where do you want to copy to. So where does the pattern start and where does the pattern sort of start to continue for the other copies. Okay, now in this case what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click somewhere near the shape on one side but not overlapping it, just near to it like this, and I'm going to turn on the tool that we've talked about before, the radial lock tool. Okay, because what I want to do is lock this in a horizontal line because I want my fish to go in a perfect line like this. Okay, now what I need to do is obviously click on the other side of the shape like this, and then it will create a pattern of 3 more copies that are all equally spaced like this. Okay, now I'm just going to go back 1 second and I'm going to show you what happens if we do overlap. So if I started my pattern somewhere on the shape and I choose somewhere also on the shape, then my pattern will obviously overlap like this. You might want this as a feature, okay, but in this case I want my shape to be have a little bit of space in between, so I'm going to choose 2 sections that are off the shape, leaving a little bit of space in between the different things. So there's my first technique, and that is to move or copy. Okay, now my second technique is to mirror. Now this is quite a nice technique if we want to create a design and have the mirror image of the design. So what I'm going to do is select all of these fish patterns this time, and I'm going to select the mirror tool, which is this one here. Okay, so I'm going to create a copy of the image. Now with the mirror settings I can choose to replace, which will just sort of mirror them and delete the original, but I want to repeat because I want to keep my existing pattern like this, so I choose repeat and click OK. Now it's asking me again to place the mirror. Now you do find sometimes that it seems like the cursor jumps around, and this is simply because we've left some of these toggle tools on, and in this case you can see I've left radial lock on. So I'm going to turn that off for a moment, and it will allow me to place my mirror, so that will be where the center of the mirror line is going to happen. So I'm going to choose a point very close to the actual shape I'm copying, and I'm going to draw a line that's completely horizontal. So once again I'm going to turn the radial lock back off again to ensure that this is a completely straight line. Now when I click for the second time you can see it creates a mirror pattern of my fish, and now I've got sort of like a mirrored shape. Okay, so there's one example of something we could do. We can create a line of copies and we could kind of mirror the pattern to create something like this. Okay, now we've done the first 4 commands. I'm just going to talk about the 2 array commands now. So I'm going to delete some of these fish and just go back to my my original copy, which is this one here. Now the rectangular array basically creates a series of fish going across in sort of one row and then down to create a series of columns. So the rectangular array is located here on the menu, and it simply asks us for how many columns we'd like going across and how many rows we'd like going down like this. And it also asked us to space the shape apart. Now you could do this by trial and error, okay, or you could obviously measure the fish like this to give me an idea of how much space I've actually got to work with. Okay, so I'm going to choose the horizontal dimension and get a rough idea of how big this is, and this is about 61 millimeters. Okay, so I'm going to use that spacing when I create my array. So I choose the array here, and I'm going to choose 3 columns and 3 rows, and I'm going to use that 61 millimeters to give myself a bit of spacing and click OK. When I click the OK box, you can see it spaced them equally apart like this, and each one is placed 61 millimeters on the horizontal and the vertical axis away from each other. So that's the rectangular array. I'm just going to go back to my fish again. Incidentally, if I do want to go back at any point, I can go edit undo, or I can press the hotkey, which is the Control and Z. Okay, now the circular array is in the same menu again, and it's here. Okay, and what this basically does is creates an array or a series of shapes, but it allows me to create them this time in a circle. Okay, now this is a little bit tricky because again it's asking me to repeat, so I've got to remember that my original shape counts as 1 and any additional repeats counts as a second, third and fourth and so on. Okay, now I'm going to produce a very simple pattern that's got 4 shapes that are all set apart, and we think about this a little bit like breaking up a circle. So a circle is 360 degrees. Okay, so if I want 3 repeats and my 1 original, I divide my 360 by 4 because that's how many I've got in total, and that gives me an angle of rotation of 90. So I click OK, and it gives me the cursor again. I'm turning off the radial lock, so I've got a bit more control over where my cursor is going to be placed, and it's basically asking me to place where I want the center of rotation to be. So I'm just going to choose a space that's a little bit away from the shape, because if I click on the shape again, like with the other tools that we talked about, the patterns will overlap. So I'm going to leave a little bit of space and click somewhere in the middle like this, and there you can see it creates a simple circular pattern. Now with the circular array, you'll notice that all of the fish are placed in the same direction, so they're all facing in the same way, and it's created my pattern like this. Okay, now the last technique that I'm going to show you is to use the rotate tool here. Okay, now the rotate tool we can use to simply rotate an object. So if I, for example, use 90 degrees again and leave it on repeat and click OK, when I click the screen it will be turned 90 degrees there. Okay, now I'm going to use this in a slightly different way though to create a pattern, by creating, just like I did with the circular array, 3 repeats. Now I click OK, and just like the circular array, I'm going to find where the center of my repeats are going to be, but this time when I click, you'll notice that each one of the fishes is turned in a 90 degree to create this pattern in this way. So there we go, that's a brief overview of the transform menu, covering all of these skills, which is move or copy, mirror, changing the size of shapes, and creating rectangular and circular arrays.